these personality disorders, including narcissistic personality disorder, were all or none. You either met the criteria or you didn't. You were either a narcissistic personality disorder or you didn't.
Welcome to Coach Soul, the podcast where we explore therapeutic ways to the best versions of ourselves. I'm your host, Steve Hudgins. I'm a licensed professional counselor dedicated to helping you navigate life's challenges. In each uplifting episode, we'll discuss mental health, relationships, self-care, emotional well-being, and personal growth. Join me and with my co-host, Kenya Evelyn, a therapeutic life coach, where sometimes we'll even welcome special guests to our show that share their experience and expertise. So let's embark on this transformative path together and discover a healthier and happier you. All right, welcome back to part two. Bowden McElroy is with us again, and so appreciative of the definitions and defining the moments of narcissistic in relationships. You know, Bowden, we kind of ended on a note about the difficulty in working with people who have narcissistic either traits or have been clinically defined as narcissists. One of the things that I think is important to know is, what is it? If it's hard work for a therapist, then why should that mate of that narcissist stay in it because it's hard work?
Before I answer that, you just triggered something in my mind. You talked about someone who has traits. So if I can spend about 2 minutes talking about what that
please
means,
do.
And then we'll come back and talk about what is that? Why would a woman want to stay with a guy like that? Back in the day, you know, when you were a baby therapist and maybe even when you were a baby, yeah, the idea was that these personality disorders, including narcissistic personality disorder, were all or none. You either met the criteria or you didn't. You were either a narcissistic personality disorder or you didn't. The lead up to this most recent revision of the diagnostic manual that we all use, they revise this thing about once every 10 years, and there's all these different committees that may in between editions. And the lead up to this latest one, there was talk about, do we want to talk about personality disorders in an all or none? You either meet the criteria or not. Or do we want to talk about it kind of the way we do the autism spectrum? You know, we used to do that with autism. You either had it or you didn't. If there was Asperger's syndrome, which was kind of autism light in autism, and you either had it or you didn't. And we changed that. We said you could be on the spectrum. You can be a little or a lot. And there's a lot of discussion in the field about doing that with these various personality disorders. That it's not all or none anymore. Or you can have traits. You can be a little this way or a lot that way. And so I think one of the reasons we see so much of this in pop psychology and so many people diagnosing themselves is they're picking up on traits and they're saying to themselves, well, this person must have it, right? Rather than he or she has some traits. And so we don't really talk about a little bit of narcissistic because it's kind of an oxymoron. I mean, if you're either self-absorbed or you're not. But the reality is there are people who kind of sort of almost meet the criteria, but not quite. Okay. And then there are those who definitely meet the criteria. We are more likely to see in therapy the people who kind of sort of almost but not quite meet the criteria. As professionals, if we were doing a research project, we might rule them out. They don't quite meet all the criteria. It's not quite that strong, but they're definitely leaning in that direction. Their spouse or their siblings or their parents or their coworkers, they don't make that distinction. They're not professionals. They just say, hey, this guy's narcissistic, right? So the first thing is, you ask, why would a woman stay with this guy? Well, you know, again, like I said, the last episode, it's possible he has a lot of good qualities in spite of being self-absorbed most of the time, in spite of being thoughtless most of the time. He has other really good qualities. So that's one reason that some women would want to stay with him, because, you know, he can be a good parent. He can be a good provider. He can at times be a good husband. That's one reason. The second reason is, as a Christian counselor, particularly as an evangelical Christian, my clients that come in wanting Christian counseling, they're committed to marriage till death do us part, right? I'm not willing to murder the guy, so I guess I'm going to have to figure out a way to live with him if I'm going to stay till death do us part. And that is a value that our culture is losing if we haven't completely lost it yet. Fewer and fewer people, the divorce rate is down in part because fewer people are getting married. And fewer people are getting married because this notion of till death do us part, they don't want to do that. They don't want to make that kind of commitment. And so one of the reasons that some women stay with these guys is they've got that kind of commitment. The third reason, and this is not research, this is just my observation, my bias, I think there are some pretty strong women that are successful in their own right, that just putting up with the self-absorbed guy is pretty easy because they've been doing that at work their whole careers. They've been kind of outperforming men and putting men in their place, for 10, 20, 30 years in the careers. And so coming home and kind of having that same dynamic, it kind of fits for them. I'm not going to say they don't see it as a problem. They just don't see it as an insurmountable problem. They see it as something that they can manage.
So when you think about this, Bowden, do narcissists have empathy?
A true narcissist, someone who meets all the criteria for that, does not. They're too self-absorbed.
Okay.
But they can fake it. Right?
Okay.
They have to wake up every day. Today, I'm going to try and remind myself that people may not see the world the same way I do. They may not feel about things the same way I feel. I'm going to approach this and try to imagine what they might be feeling. I think that is a social skill that can be learned. Does empathy form naturally within these guys? Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not.
I think it's interesting that we are able to discuss and define narcissism because we just kind of have this generation of we're going to call you and label you, and that's what we walk away. And unfortunately, a lot of people get hurt by these bullets of the DSM-5 that they're not using correctly. It's what they hear. It's what they go off of. And so you and I treat these couples that have these difficulties in their marriage. And I do see a difference between having faith-based versus secular type counseling. And, I've done some research. I'm in my final phase of my dissertation, hopefully to have it by March of my doctorate in education, and understanding blended families. And what got me on the track was a 65% higher divorce rate. But that goes back to 1999. We do not have a current statistic because they stopped focusing on the funding of tracking this. Now we do have more cohabitation. But as, faith-based, I kind of take a little different approach than most therapists when it comes to therapy, because research has shown using a faith-based approach lasts longer, and it's more effective than the secular. So when you come to face with couples who have this narcissistic tendency or a codependent that becomes that human magnet syndrome, what effect does faith or no faith at all help with these kind of marriages?
So we're talking about the faith of three people involved here: him, her, and the therapist, right?
Okay.
So as a Christian counselor, being a Christian counselor does not mean I have a collection of tools in my toolbox labeled Christian tools. What it means is I have a particular view of the world, a particular understanding about what makes human beings tick, how we're made in the image of God, what that means, how we have a sin nature, what that means. all of that speaks to how does health come about? How do we bring about health? And that's a very different viewpoint than someone without faith. So part of that dynamic in my office, I have faith. And I have faith that God is at work in people's lives, that God pursues us, that he wants us to come to him in a knowledge of faith, in salvation, and that he wants us to become mature Christians and mature disciples. Now, as a Christian counselor, most of my clients have self-selected a Christian counselor. It's important to one or both of them. And so that's a real advantage when working with these narcissistic men. If they have a faith background, they will tell you they want to be a godly man. They may even think they are. And they may be some of the time, but they're missing a big piece. And so the want to, I can use that as a tool to help them see, here's some areas you're falling short. I can also help them see that, if you think of narcissism as self-absorbed and self-focused, and we're all selfish, narcissism is normal to a higher degree. We're all selfish. The narcissist is selfish to the next level, right? We all get self-absorbed. The narcissist is self-absorbed to the 10th power. So I can use that. That's one of the tools that I use to help these guys see, wait a second, there is, as Paul said, a better way, right? And that better way is to be truly a disciple of Christ, which means what do we tell everybody who comes to Christ? Take up your cross daily. You've got to sacrifice yourself. So if I've got a couple who are both Christians, a narcissistic male who somehow has found God probably more accurately has called him, then that gives me an opening that I don't have with men who don't have faith, who are just as lost as they can be.
When it comes down to here is our culture, divorce rates are down, marriages are also down. We have more single people than ever than there have been marriages. When you think about what you shared earlier about most women want to stay or have hope in changing the marriage, that type of thing. Bowden, what are some tools or things that you try to bring to the table when dealing with narcissistic men? And, we don't advocate for divorce. We try to make it things as long as there's not abuse and things of that nature. But what are tools or something that we can provide to couples who are in this type of situation?
So again, my philosophy is to help each one of them find this individuation, which is a technical term that basically means I recognize that I'm my own person. I'm not merely an extension of you. I'm not merely an extension of the marriage. It's a little tricky in faith-based marriage counseling because we do treat the marriage as a unit. God did say the two shall become one. But I don't, there's an old joke. It's not funny necessarily, but it's old. The kid who goes to his grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary, and he's talking to his grandfather, and he says, "Man, Grandpa, 50 years. What's that like?" His grandfather said, "Well, 50 years ago, we stood up in the church in front of God and everybody. The preacher told us the two shall become one. And we've been arguing ever since about which one of us that's going to be." I told you it might not be funny, but it is old. I help people not do that. You don't have to fit into his life. He doesn't have to fit into your life. The idea of marriage is that we're a new creation. We're not just one, but we're something new and different. And I don't have to supplement or subvert all of who I am just to keep the peace. I do not teach peace at any cost. Peace at any cost is a huge mistake. The Bible tells us, particularly men, to be bold and courageous. Sometimes that means being bold and courageous enough to rock the boat a little bit, right? And so as I teach people to be individuals, one of the things I do is I help them understand what a healthy, godly marriage is supposed to look like, right? So let's look at the scripture. Let's look at what your pastor says. Let's look at some books. Let's talk about your experiences in early childhood, the marriages you saw. What do you want your marriage to look like? So that's a good starting point. Then I find those places where they agree, right? Okay, so you both want more peace in the marriage, less arguing. How do we get there? Well, again, I used to believe in communication and problem solving skills was all it took. Now I realize it's deeper than that. I have to want to solve the problem. I have to want to love you sacrificially. And so I began to help them see part of this is communication. When you say less arguing, what does that look like to you? If one partner thinks it means I always get my way, we got a problem. If one partner thinks it means we will never raise our voices, we have a problem. If it means that we're willing to negotiate these things, then we can work with that. One of the things I find about a lot of narcissistic men, not all of them, and maybe it's just my practice, but a lot of them have achieved a certain degree of success in the business world. And I remind them, hey, you didn't get there by being a bully. You got there by being able to communicate well, to problem solve well, to negotiate. Why are you leaving those skills at the office? Why aren't you bringing those skills into the home? Right? Now, I know the answer to that. The answer is at the end of the day, we're tired. And we have this false belief, this irrational belief that, my home is my castle. When I walk through, everybody ought to say hail to the chief and bow to my whims. Well, that's crazy. It's never going to happen, right? It's not what's supposed to happen. I don't just get to leave those skills at the office. I have to bring them into the home. And so that's another technique I use. What do you want your marriage to look like? Mm-hmm. What skills do you have that you use on a regular basis? They're transferable. You're just choosing not to use them. Maybe because you think you shouldn't have to, which is a false belief. Right? Another skill that I use, and I learned this years ago working with teenagers, right? Because when you're fresh out of grad school and you're only 22 years old, not a lot of adults want to work with you. You end up working with a lot of teenagers. And I would work with these kids who wanted to be adults, even though they were only 14. And I would say, what do you want out of life, right? And so a lot of these boys in particular, well, they want a lot of money, they want a good job, they want fast cars, they want loose women, right? And so I'd have to point out to them, in order to get fast cars are expensive. You have to have a good job. You've got to buckle down. It starts with passing the 9th grade. If you want to date attractive women, I said loose women. But if you want to be active in the dating scene, it's expensive to date. At least it was in my day. I don't know what it's like these days.
It still is.
Okay, just checking. There are things you got to do starting at 14, so that when you're 24 or 34, you will have these life skills necessary. And I do the same thing with marriages. Let's daydream a little bit about what you want. Say you guys stay married 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. What do you want that to look like? Okay, what skills do you need now to help you get there? So there's a lot of communication skills, a lot of problem solving skills, a lot of working on individuation. I am a separate, autonomous person. I don't have to have a bad day just because you're having a bad day. I don't have to have a good day just because you're having a good day. I can have some goals and dreams and activities that don't involve you, right? We're not joined at the hip. We don't have to do everything together. One of the you asked for tools. One of the tools that I use is I ask each of them individually to write down what they want their life to look like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And so they write this big line, and I tell them everything: where you live, what kind of job you have, what you do for fun, everything. What do you want that to look like? And they generate this big long list, each of them. Then I have them go back, and again, they're doing this separately. Now I want you to go back, Steve, and I want you to take that list you wrote, and I want you to divide it into 2 lists. One is things that require her participation. If you want long walks on the beach with your spouse, that requires her participation. The other list are things that don't require her participation. If you want to get more involved in the men's ministry at the church, you can do that happily married, unhappily married, or divorced. You want to play more golf, you can do that happily married, unhappily married, or divorced. So we've got these two lists. Most marriage counseling says let's focus on the list that requires your participation. I don't start there. I start with let's work on the list that doesn't require her participation or his participation. Let's find, move on with your life. Let's move on with your life without worrying about divorce or separation, right? If I could wave a magic wand and you were divorced tonight, what would you want your life to look like? Now we've got that list. Why do you have to be divorced to work on it? Why can't you start working on that now? Right. So I begin to build some success in helping them see that marriage is important, but we're not joined at the hip. We're holding hands. We don't have our legs tied together like a three-legged race.
When you think about these marriages, Bowden, it's challenging often to get them out of their childhood hurt wounds. Oftentimes when they're escalating, it's because I'm not being seen. I don't feel safe and I don't feel like I have a choice. Same thing as a child. And so these things come to surface in these relationships, normal and those who are toxic. One of the things that I think is important too is here we are in blended families now. People want to be successful because this is my second chance at a marriage. What are some things in a blended family that you would look at as far as the narcissistic men? These women are becoming attractive to them, or they are attracted to the narcissist in them. And now it's a blended family. Now you have children involved. It becomes a very complex, convoluted type situation. How do you work with that?
You have children involved, her children, my children, our children. You also have exes involved, right? Right. I tell people crazy exes have bought my house for me. They've paid my mortgage. People come in just, I don't describe them as crazy. My clients describe their exes. And they come in we are overwhelmed with trying to deal with this. So the first thing that I try to do is I help them understand what are reasonable, realistic expectations. It is not realistic for me to think that I'm going to enter into your relationship where you have these three kids that are 8, 10, and 12. And suddenly I'm going to become more important to you than they are. That's not realistic. And I get people saying, well, that's what the Bible says. The Bible says that the marriage is primary. Yeah, plan A, your first marriage, we're already on plan B. Mm-hmm. We've already kind of moved right past that, right? And so this idea that I'm going to supplant or in order of my children are in some degree always going to be a little more important to me than you are because I've had them longer. I've had that relationship longer. It's more intense. That doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore you. And that's where we start working out, again, what do you want your marriage to look like? Well, I want, I want to be able to parent these children without having to go through my spouse on everything. So, well, how about if we reframe that differently? How about if you just want your children to be respectful of any adult, whether it's the stepdad, the school teacher, the coach? Let's start there. Mm-hmm. Don't try to be their dad. Stepdad we don't have one of the problems is we talk about the Bible being a manual for living. We don't have a manual for step parents. And there's only a handful of books, really only one that I ever recommend that has to do with Christian families that are blending, right? That's Smart Families. A guy out of Arkansas wrote a book 15, 20 years ago. It's the only one I found that I thought was worthwhile. There may be some new ones in the last 3 or 4 years that have been published. But it's this whole idea of we've got to decide what we want our marriage to look like, and so that we can start working toward that. Too many people come into marriage just assuming that because this is what I think a marriage ought to look like, you share the same things. And they don't. We don't. Not even in first marriages, especially not in second marriages.
So
here, this is kind of an interesting thing, Steve. Two asides. The first interesting factoid is Pittsburgh County in southeastern Oklahoma, right? McAlester, Oklahoma is the biggest town in Pittsburgh County. Pittsburgh County had the highest per capita divorce rate of any county in the nation for a number of years. So I don't think it's true any longer, but for a number of years that was true. Why? Well, it's because it's rural Oklahoma. We still believe in getting married. You can't get divorced if you're not getting married first, right? The second interesting little fact is when people come to a marriage, when I ask, let me back up. I'm getting tongue-tied. When I ask people, why did you get married? I hear all about the positive stuff.
Yes.
She was amazing. She was wonderful. She was smart. She was witty. She was attractive. He was amazing. He was successful. He was driven. He was smart. He was witty. He was attractive. There is an entire theory in marriage and family therapy that says that we don't marry because of the positive traits. We marry because we are unconsciously attracted to the negative traits. Now, why? Why would I be unconsciously attracted to the negative traits? Well, the theory says because I failed the first time experiencing this in my childhood and my early adulthood, I want to get it right this time. I want to prove to myself, God, and the world that I can actually be successful at this. So I marry someone with some of the same toxic characteristics that mom and dad and ex-wife or ex-husband had. I don't think that theory is true all of the time, but my own observation teaches me that it's true often, maybe not even most of the time, but often. You know, that's the old saying, I want a girl just like the girl who married dear old dad. Not because she's wonderful, but because I want to go back and deal with those hearts and wounds from mom and dad, and I want to get it right this time. And so that's why we see people marrying and having the same struggles, right? So part of it is, what's the common denominator in these two marriages or three marriages? It's me. Well, if I'm a narcissist, I don't want to look at that. Mm-hmm. Part of it is because I keep being attracted to people who are going to set up the same kinds of problems for me. And so helping people realize that's a big strategy in marriage counseling.
I appreciate the time that you've given. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but one thing is that Bowden is here in the Tulsa area community of Oklahoma, and he does support men. I support men. I'm an advocate for men's fathers' rights, having the privilege to working with Governor Keating and getting the equal access law passed in 2001 to ensure that parents have equal access. So Bowden and I are advocates for men, and oftentimes there's not enough support out there. Bowden, real quick, how can men reach out to you or women who are struggling with narcissistic men that are needing help? What are some ways that they can contact you real quick?
Well, they can look on my website, and I have to spell it, Bowden McElroy, McElroy, BowdenMcElroy.com. My phone number is 918-346-3665. My email, Bowden@BowdenMcElroy.com. So any of those ways, smoke signals, I'll respond to those. I mean, anyway, those are three different ways you can get a hold of me. Yeah. And I don't work just with men. Men's my primary target audience. But men have women in their lives, and those women often don't understand them, and I can help them understand their men better. So I like to tell people I speak male, And if you are a male or you need to learn how to speak male, I can work with you.
Well, and I appreciate the time. And I think it's really important to let the community know that, there seems to be an awful lot of resources for females and those type of things. But men, there are resources out there for you. Bowde and I are happy to work with you. We're happy to work with couples and females as well. That's what we're here for, to help this. And we hope that you find these two podcasts helpful for you, to give you an insight from a therapeutic standpoint, to let you know that you're not alone. And that's what Coach Soul is about. It's about how to be a better you, meaning that we can be better today than we were a second ago. And so until next time, take care and God bless. Thanks, Bowden.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on Coach Soul. As we wrap up, we want to remind our listeners of a few key points. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content shared here is based on professional opinion but may not apply to everyone's situation. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider before making changes to your mental health care. If you're in a crisis, please seek immediate professional help or contact a crisis hotline. Listening to this podcast does not create a therapist-client relationship. For personal advice, please consult with your licensed mental health professional in your area. Remember, your mental health journey is unique. While we hope this information is helpful, it is crucial to work directly with the qualified personnel for your specific needs. Thank you again for tuning in to Coach Soul, and we'll see you next time.